The one thing that I kind of realized, because I sometimes I need to think about documentaries before I talk about them because I'm not sure how I feel about them, and I'm like, what else would I have liked to have known? I was like, they really didn't talk to that many people, actually. They talked to like three and a half players, the GM at the time, and then a couple of reporters, and that was like kind of it. And so I guess I wish that we'd gotten a more full picture of what was going on other than what Bob Whitsitt thought. Um, because the construction of that team, I think the reason why they showed us that 2000 finals is because like they that was like a cascading moment for like why the decisions went the way that they did in terms of him building the team of what like things he was trying to build toward. But like it's just too bad that we don't know what other people thought and whether there was any conflict with what Witsit wanted and whether he faced any backlash within the organization as like the years progressed and some of these problems persisted.
Yeah, I didn't cover as much as I thought it was going to cover. Kind of like how you're saying who they talked to. I think when I w was went in to watch it, I was expecting. I knew that it was made by the same people who had made the Malice in the Palace, a documentary, and I remember when I watched that years ago. I think it was the same one. I don't know if there've been multiple Malice in the Palace documentaries, but when I watched the Malice in the Palace documentary, like my eyes opened up to things that I didn't realize were happening like outside of the NBA that like influenced what happened and influenced how people reacted to it and what happened next. And I kind of thought that's what I was prepared for. That even though maybe it's because I grew up in Portland and I was here during the time, some of the stuff that was like more interesting, like from the outside of Indiana when I watched Malice in the Palace. Um, I thought there would be some more revelation and more of a like time for us to like look at ourselves of who we were in Portland, in the Portland area at that time, and like sort of evaluate who we were and how we took in things. So I was like all like geared up for that. And it seemed to me it was sort of more of a like factual telling of like here's what happened with a not a ton of analysis about like maybe why people reacted the way that they did. What
Yeah,
about you,
and
Bruce? Oh.
this was like a conditioning for like I mean, quite frankly, this preceded Malice in the Palace by like what, like 3, 4 years or something. Like there was like I thought that we would get a little bit more of a perspective about how the league was perceiving our team also, because there was definitely this like growing over that period of time of like what's going on with the NBA, what's going on with the NBA, and then Malice in the Palace happened. And I did think of like what happened with the Jailblazers as kind of a precursor to that, of like them taking that super seriously. And then like they redid a ton of rules because of what happened in Malice in the Palace, but it had been as like a slow simmer leading up to it, and they didn't talk about this in the context of the greater NBA like at all.
Yeah, there were so many. I feel like the documentary was really just the broadest of strokes with this. And the thing that stood out to me as far as like Terry talking about just like how they interviewed three and a half players basically. Just like it was really centered around Rasheed Wallace, Damon Stoudemire, Bonzi Wells. And you can see why. You have Rasheed Wallace, like the rambunctious outsider star player, goes by the beat of his own drum. Damon Stoudemire, the hometown hero. Bonzi Wells, the guy who basically like, rose up in Portland on this team through this experience and gets kind of lumped in with this quote unquote jailblazers idea despite never having any criminal anything, no charges, no nothing, just, he had some interviews where, he didn't have the greatest quotes about fans, but also is a frustrated kid. and and Sean Kemp, who his his time with the Blazers was not it's not what we remember. Um, but it's also I think about especially when it comes to that Jailblazers moniker, like I think about the journalists they talked to. Like, there's Canzano was on there, but otherwise it was like Colin Cowherd, who, is a national figure who was here. But where's Dwight James on this? Where's Kerry Eggers? You know,
Hmm.
there are
Carrie, who
people.
wrote the book, he wrote the Jailblazers book, and he wasn't in this. I was shocked that Carrie wasn't actually.
Yeah, you're just like you're missing. And again, I get that Untold is its own institution. It's these, single part series, so it's not going to be, the people who are all the way in there. But at the same time, it's just like, oh, we're missing some perspective. We're missing some very valuable perspective of like how this whole narrative was shaped, and also just the context with, for me, maybe this is just well, it's not small, but we talk about that 99 2000 series because it's the Lakers. It went 7 games. It had this epic collapse in the fourth quarter, but Blazers were in the conference finals the year before. They got swept by the Spurs, but I think they and the Jazz both had like some 20 plus year playoff runs at the time. Like, there was other context around this, even with the whole like thinking about players getting in trouble. Like, they kind of smoothed over some things. I mean, I think the big focus, obviously, and we'll also get to this a little bit later, is, Ruben Patterson, genuine bad guy. But, there's like Sabonis had some like we all love Sabonis, but there were things there, you know, and we just yeah, again, just like very, very broad strokes.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I was kind of expecting that this was going to show us a little bit more about who we as a community were, who Portland was. And maybe that's just me being selfish and making it, it all about myself. But like, I think one of the interesting things about sports that makes it compelling is like how much it's a reflection back of society. And I think in Portland it is a really interesting topic to delve into. But it was really just more like what happened, and then they had this guy, and then they got this guy, and this guy left, and then this chemistry fell off, and then it was over, rather than how does it reflect, um, how did what was going on with the team reflect who we are? I mean, like the name the Jailblazers itself, like just talking about that name for a team of players like that could be a whole rich text just to talk about what happens when a community labels their sports team that. And didn't go into that as much as I kind of thought that they would.
And this area has like plenty of a racist past to talk about some of these things. And they almost like they thought about talking about it, it seemed like they almost wanted to talk about it, but nobody ever like said this community like has a long history of racism, and it is a dominant white community, one of the most dominant white communities for an NBA team out there. And they didn't they tiptoed around the edges of it, but they never really said it, and they didn't bring any research or context to like I think build around the stories of these players to really like help people not from Portland understand what it's like to live here. They talked a little bit about Damon being a hometown boy or whatever, but like they didn't talk a whole lot about how few black people lived in Portland, especially Portland. Like he's from Southwest Portland. Like, like I think that like when you think of the historically black neighborhoods in Portland, people think about like Northeast. Like he lived in Southwest Portland at the time, which was like a like very, very white community. And they almost talked about it, but then they pulled back, I felt like a little bit.
Yeah, they touched on Lake Oswego, which obviously is, my hometown, and I did appreciate the little almost like Lake No Negro montage they had there. And I almost forgot the other reporter on there. God, I should have written this down, but Jeffrey Allen. I want to say from the Oregonian, who was notable for a few reasons, but in this documentary, it really was the focus because Rasheed Wallace got to a point where he would stop talking to media, but then he meets Jeffrey and he's like, wait, they have black reporters at the Oregonian, and gives him gives him the interview. But yeah, they just don't, there's just little bits and pieces like that. I think they had some like archival footage of just some fan being like, and they're all thugs, and but they just pepper over it. And again, it kind of comes back to that one, like the history, again, Oregon, only state to pass black exclusion laws, three of them, and the residue that lingers to this day from that, but specifically from a sports context, like just again that crushing loss and how people react to that, because it was making me think of I went to games 3 and 4 of the series with San Antonio. When you can just listen to people like when you're just in the line at the bathroom, and because I think like what was it on when De'Aaron Fox had that one foul on Denny and like chipped his tooth, and it's like you're hearing that same stuff like in the bathroom line about like, oh, De'Aaron Fox is a dirty player, you got to get him out of the league. All the and it's like, ooh, we're in the first round of a series that we didn't expect to be in. Is it that serious? Is it that's all it took to kind of trigger all that out? Hmm. That's interesting. But it's like it feels like it's almost like I think about it, especially with like high school sports and everything where sports feels like a safe space to let that energy out. And
Mm.
this when the stakes get higher, you see it and people feel real again, real safe, real comfortable letting all that very racialized angst out, even when it's your own team.